After weeks of back-to-back projects and sleepless nights, I was desperate for some peace, for time to breathe again without the constant ping of emails, the buzz of my phone, or the weight of deadlines pressing on me. So, when I stumbled across a listing for an isolated barn in Oregon, I thought it was the perfect solution. The listing promised complete solitude, a place where I could disconnect, recharge, and maybe even rediscover some clarity. The barn, according to the pictures, had been converted into a cozy haven nestled among towering pines. A rustic, charming escape where the hustle of city life could be forgotten. There were no neighbors for miles, and the description boasted of serene walks in the mist-covered woods and evenings by the fire pit, all framed by the silhouette of an old barn. It was everything I needed. I checked the reviews, most were glowing, with only the occasional vague mention of the quiet being unnerving. The hosts, however, seemed to make people feel at ease with their warm, welcoming approach. Warren, the owner, had worked in the surrounding forests for decades, according to his bio. He sounded like the type of person who lived in harmony with the land. There was something calming about it until the moment I arrived. The moment I turned off the main highway and onto the dirt road leading to the barn, I felt a shift in the air. The trees seemed to grow denser, the road narrowing as if the forest was slowly swallowing me whole. I didn't even notice how long the drive had been. It felt as though time was bending. When I pulled up to the barn, my stomach tightened. The house, large and looming, seemed to be swallowed by the trees, the forest pushing in on it from every side. The barn's aged wood and peeling paint gave it an almost haunted look, starkly different from the cozy photos online. Warren stood on the porch, waiting. His smile was warm, but there was something unsettling in the stillness of his gaze, a fixed calm that didn't quite match the situation. His hands were large and weathered, his beard thick and unkempt. He didn't seem to age, not in the usual way. His clothes were well worn, comfortable, and his presence filled the space in a way that made me feel like I was being sized up. He welcomed me like an old friend, but that welcoming smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "I trust the drive wasn't too difficult," he said with that same strange, disarming smile. I nodded, though something deep inside urged me to keep my distance. My instincts, ever the alert ones, whispered that something wasn't right. But I had come here to relax, to stop thinking for a while. So, I shoved my discomfort to the back of my mind and nodded. I was alone. Completely alone, save for the eerie quiet of the house. I sat in the living room for hours that evening, the glow of the fire flickering in the hearth, casting long, twisted shadows on the walls. The first few hours had been peaceful. I had unpacked, settled in, and then, as evening wore on, I started to feel the stillness of the place seep into my bones. It was the kind of quiet you don't experience in the city. The kind where you begin to notice the lack of even the smallest noises, the rustle of leaves, the chirp of insects, the hum of wind. Instead, there was only silence. I tried to shake it off. Maybe it was just the isolation, the absence of people, the stillness of the forest pressing in on me. But by the time the sun dipped below the horizon, a weight settled over the barn, like the land itself was holding its breath. I read, hoping the pages would distract me from the strange sensation creeping up my spine. Yet, every time I turned a page, the silence seemed to grow thicker, suffocating the words. Every now and then, I would glance toward the window, my gaze drawn to the dark outside. The shadows seemed deeper, as if the trees were creeping closer. The barn groaned with the settling of the old wood, a soft, almost comforting sound at first, until it wasn't. I began to hear it then, the sound of footsteps. At first, it was distant, faint. Maybe it was an animal, a deer, or a raccoon. But as the footsteps grew louder, clearer, they sounded deliberate, steady, heavy. My heart began to race. I strained to listen, wondering if Warren was outside, maybe walking around to check on something. But then, The sound circled the house slow, measured steps, as though someone was pacing. The sound stopped just outside the window near my bed, then started again on the other side of the barn, as if whatever it was walking the perimeter of the house. I held my breath, waiting for the sound to end, but it didn't. It just kept going, around and around, until it stopped, but only for a moment before the unmistakable sound of someone scratching against the wood of the barn wall. It was slow, deliberate, like someone trying to draw attention to themselves. I scrambled out of bed, my feet cold on the wooden floor, my heart thundering in my chest. The scratches continued. They grew louder, like claws dragging against the wood. I moved to the window, my hands shaking as I pulled the curtain back ever so slightly. My eyes scanned the yard, the trees, the shadows, but I saw nothing. It was as if the figure, the presence, had vanished into the night without a trace. My skin prickled, my breath shallow as I stood there, frozen. The feeling was undeniable now. Something was wrong, and I was not alone. The next morning brought no relief. If anything, the sense of unease only deepened. The air was thick with something unspoken, an oppressive presence that hung heavily in the yard. The sun was high in the sky, and I should have felt better, should have felt reassured by the daylight. But all I could focus on were the strange marks in the yard, the deep gouges in the dirt, as though something had been dragged through the yard. They were fresh, too deep to be the result of an animal, and they led from the house to the barn. I tried to keep my cool, to remain rational, but there was something about those marks that sent chills crawling up my spine. I couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't left by anything natural. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of it, but nothing fit. And as much as I wanted to ignore it, to pretend everything was normal, I couldn't. Warren appeared from the back of the barn, carrying a lantern. His eyes met mine, but this time, there was something different in them, something colder, more guarded. He didn't acknowledge the strange marks, didn't even look at them. Instead, he simply smiled and offered a low, steady greeting. "All's well, I hope." I nodded, but I couldn't bring myself to speak, to ask him about what I had seen. I turned my attention back to the marks, pretending to look at the ground. My fingers trembled as I clutched the handle of my bag. But Warren noticed, or at least I thought he did. "I hope you don't mind the quiet," he said, his voice as steady as ever. "This land's got a way of making one feel isolated. But in a good way. Peaceful, even." The words hung in the air for a moment too long. They seemed too perfect, too rehearsed. And then he walked back toward the barn, leaving me to stare at the marks in the dirt, unsure of what to make of them. As the evening approached, my sense of dread became unbearable. I knew I wasn't going to sleep. Not after everything that had happened. The footsteps, the strange sounds, the way Warren had been acting, it was too much. I had to leave. But something was holding me back, something I couldn't explain. It wasn't just fear, it was a deep, unsettling feeling that the barn itself was somehow trapping me, keeping me there, anchored by forces I couldn't see or understand. I sat on the bed, staring at the walls, the shadows creeping across the floor. But then I saw it, the stone. It was small and smooth, lying under the door as if someone had carefully placed it there. I picked it up, my fingers trembling as I held it in my palm. It was cold to the touch, far colder than any stone had any right to be. A chill crept down my spine as I stared at it. Something about it felt wrong. The stone was smooth, almost too smooth, and there was something about its weight that felt deliberate. I stood up, my head spinning, my thoughts racing. The footsteps began again. Slow, deliberate, coming closer to the door. I couldn't wait anymore. I grabbed my bag, stuffing it with everything I could find. The stone fell to the floor with a soft thud, but I didn't care. I couldn't stand it any longer. But as I opened the door, I froze. Warren stood there, smiling at me with that same unsettling, too wide grin. His eyes gleamed with something dark, something ancient. "Leaving so soon?" he asked, his voice thick with mock sympathy. I didn't say a word. I just turned and ran. A week later, I received a message from Warren through Airbnb: "You left something behind. I'll hold it for you." I couldn't even bring myself to respond. I didn't want anything from that place. But when I saw the review from another guest, my blood ran cold. If he offers you a bone charm, don't take it. Don't sleep near the shed. Don't stay for the second night. The words echoed in my mind, a grim reminder of everything I had felt at that place. I didn't want to know what secrets Warren was hiding. And I didn't want to know what else lay buried beneath the surface of that barn. But I would never forget the way the trees had pressed in on me, the way the land itself had felt alive, suffocating me. The barn had been more than just a place, it was a trap. A curse, waiting for its next victim. And I would never return. It was a perfect getaway, or so I thought. I had been craving solitude for months, longing for a retreat where I could clear my mind, escape the noise of my bustling life, and reconnect with myself. The listing on Airbnb promised just that: a secluded house in Alabama, surrounded by nature. The photos on the site painted a picture of a charming, rustic cottage nestled among towering pine trees, with an old-fashioned fireplace and a cozy atmosphere. The very description spoke to my longing for peace and quiet. But the moment I arrived, something felt off. It wasn't the house itself. It was cozy, old, but well kept, exactly as advertised. It was the surroundings that unnerved me. The dense trees, the thick blanket of mist that hung around the area, the heavy quiet that surrounded the place, it all made me feel as though the world outside had ceased to exist. Even the birds seemed to have gone silent. I noticed it immediately: there was no sound. I attributed my unease to the long drive. Maybe I was just tired, or maybe the unfamiliar environment was getting to me. I tried to shake it off and push through. As I unpacked, I noticed the house's strange layout. It was small, but with a winding corridor and rooms that felt oddly disconnected. The walls were adorned with vintage art, landscapes of forests and small houses, each framed in dark wood. It was like stepping into a different time, an era where the clock moved slower, where you could truly escape from the world. The host, Ron, seemed like a friendly enough man. In his late 50s, with a stocky build and a weathered face, he greeted me warmly. He showed me around the property, explaining the oddities of the house, like the fireplace that required a particular technique to light, or the peculiar little storage rooms under the stairs. "I hope you find it comfortable," he said, his eyes lingering on me for a moment longer than I felt comfortable with. There was something about his gaze that I couldn't quite place. It wasn't just curiosity, it was as if he was sizing me up. "Everything seems perfect," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. I had learned over the years to ignore my instincts when they felt irrational, and I forced myself to believe this would be a peaceful, healing retreat. The first 2 nights were surprisingly quiet. I spent most of the days hiking in the woods, taking in the serenity that the house had promised. But as night fell, I started to feel a growing sense of discomfort, a gnawing feeling in the pit of my stomach that something was wrong. It wasn't the house itself, but something about the land, the stillness, the way it seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for something to happen. On the 3rd night, as I sat by the fireplace, trying to shake off the growing sense of unease, I decided to call my friend, Mia, back home. I hadn't spoken to anyone for days, and the isolation was beginning to feel heavier than I had expected. The call was a relief at first, a reminder of the normal world, the one I was used to. We talked about everything: life, work, family, until the conversation took an unsettling turn. Mia's voice dropped low, and she stopped mid-sentence. "Wait a second, who's that behind you?" she asked, her tone suddenly tinged with worry. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. I turned around quickly, but the room behind me was empty. The only thing I saw was the dark shadows creeping along the walls, distorted by the flickering light of the fire. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. Mia was still staring at her screen, her eyes wide. "There's someone standing behind you. Right behind you." I looked again, my pulse racing, but there was no one. The room was empty. Just me, the fire, and the flickering light. I laughed nervously, trying to brush it off. Maybe the call had glitched, maybe it was a trick of the light. "Probably just a glitch," I said, but the words felt hollow. Mia looked unconvinced, but before she could respond, the video froze. The screen went black for a few seconds, then came back to life, but the odd sensation lingered. My mind raced. Had I imagined it? Or had something really been there, just out of sight? The call ended shortly after that, and I sat in silence, staring at the screen. The house seemed even quieter now, and the shadows felt heavier. It was then that I realized, I wasn't alone. The thought sent a cold shiver down my spine. I tried to reason with myself. It had to be my mind playing tricks, right? But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The air had changed. The following day, the oppressive quiet continued, but I tried to push past it. I spent the morning exploring the house, opening cupboards, inspecting corners, just to keep myself occupied. But as I was passing the fireplace, something caught my attention. The wall behind it seemed strange. There was a panel of wood, different from the rest, slightly askew, as though it had been moved recently. Curiosity got the better of me. I gently ran my fingers along the panel. It creaked slightly, the wood shifting as I applied pressure. Without thinking, I pried it loose, revealing a narrow, hidden space behind the fireplace. At first, I hesitated. What if this was a mistake? But my curiosity was stronger than my hesitation. I pushed the panel further, revealing a small room behind it. It was pitch dark, and my breath caught in my throat. I reached for my phone to use the flashlight and stepped inside. The room was small, barely big enough for a person to stand. The air was musty, untouched for years, but it wasn't empty. A single chair sat in the middle of the room, positioned oddly, facing the corner. It looked worn, like someone had been sitting there recently. The back of the chair was worn, the wood polished from years of use. My heart began to race. It felt wrong, too wrong. Who had been sitting here? Before I could make sense of what I had found, a sudden noise made me freeze. A faint sound from outside the room, footsteps. I darted out of the hidden space, my pulse pounding in my ears. When I turned toward the window, I saw him, Ron, standing outside, watching me. His face was expressionless, his eyes fixed on mine, unmoving. I felt a chill run through me, as though he had been waiting for me to discover the room. By the time night fell, the atmosphere in the house had shifted entirely. The walls seemed to close in, and every creak of the floorboards seemed amplified. I could feel eyes on me, though I knew no one was there. Each corner of the house held something I couldn't explain, and each shadow seemed to twist with something malevolent. I tried to sleep, but the terror that gripped me was too strong. The feeling of being watched intensified. The moments of peace from the first days felt distant now, replaced by a constant tension in the air. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was losing my mind. Was it the isolation? Was it just the house, old and creaky? Then, it happened again. I opened my phone to check the time and saw a strange image in my photo gallery, a blurry, distorted figure standing behind me, just as I had seen on the video call days before. The figure was elongated, its shape wrong, as though it were stretching or twisting unnaturally. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I looked around the room, the corners growing darker, more oppressive. The image was unmistakable. It was a shadow, a presence, standing behind me as I had slept. It had been there the whole time. I didn't waste another second. I grabbed my things and rushed out the door, my heart pounding. But as I stepped outside, I saw something that stopped me dead in my tracks. The chair, the one from the hidden room, was now sitting on the porch, facing the door. Its back was straight, and it seemed to be waiting for me. I left in a hurry, not looking back once as I drove away from the house. My mind was spinning, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. But as I passed the entrance to the driveway, a strange sense of calm washed over me. It was as if the silence of the house, the feeling of being watched, had wrapped itself around me and was now following me out of the woods. Weeks passed, and life returned to normal, or so I tried to convince myself. But the house lingered in my thoughts. What had happened there? What was the secret behind those walls, behind the door of the hidden room? I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't supposed to leave. That the house had wanted me to stay, to uncover its secrets. And I feared that by leaving, I had somehow sealed my fate. When I searched for the listing again, I found nothing. It was gone, vanished, as though it had never existed. No trace of the house, no sign of Ron or the strange chair. It was as though the place had never been there at all. But the memory haunted me. Some places don't just hold memories. Some places hold secrets, dark ones that you're never meant to uncover. And sometimes, the more you try to forget, the more they cling to you, like shadows in the dark.